So I was born and raised in Vienna, Austria. I lived here until I was 18, and then I moved to the States to go to college. My parents are both teachers. My father eventually became an author himself. And I guess school was challenging for me because I was diagnosed with a learning disability early on, which was very formative in the creation of the bullet journal method over time. So I had very creative parents, which helped. And I had parents that did not insist on perfectionism. They always encouraged me to do the best that I possibly could, and that was good enough for them. And I felt like that was a lot more of a helpful model to make my way through life with in general, because I always had to hold myself up to a higher standard. Perfection always just seemed ridiculous. Like, what does that even mean? But I know how I can be better. So I think that was a big driving force. A couple. I really like creative writing. That was a big one. I actually had the privilege of taking my father's class for a couple of years in high school. I also really loved design classes in all mediums, like whether it be typographic design or sculpture. I loved sculpture. I took a metalsmithing class for many years. That was also very formative because the teacher was very demanding and very fair. Well, it's interesting. I was born an American in a foreign country, essentially, so where I grew up, I was a foreigner. And when I was in the States, I was an Austrian, so I wanted to know more about where I was from. I wanted to know more about America, plus the schools that I looked at and the format of the education system appealed more to me. I don't really work well in a lecture format, which seemed to be my options in Europe. And I had family in America that I didn't really know, that were estranged at that point, so I wanted to get to know them better. Estranged is a little too severe, but I just didn't grow up with them, and they were my age, and I'm happy to say that I have gotten really close to them since then. Everything's about design. I feel like you're always looking for ways to optimize not only the way you go about organizing your information, but the way you're structuring your life and the way that you're structuring your thoughts. So for me, everything is always about design. What efficiencies can I get out of this? When does efficiency become its own obstacle, right? Sometimes because you can organize all day long and get nothing done. So for me, design has always about less but better. So trying to find that balance at all times, that's what it is, and that's what the bullet journal is about. For me, it's always about trying to spend the most amount of time with the fewest amount of things, and I feel like that's been my design ethos across any kind of medium. Some days are better than others, certainly. I'm just as guilty of over-planning as other people as well. I just try to remember what it is that I'm planning for. Like, for me, planning is a step along the way. It isn't the end point for me. So what's the least amount of work I can do for the greatest amount of impact? Because productivity can be its own form of distractions. Like, everything is now aligned, everything is in its place. Like, cool, how much work did you get done? Well, I've been planning all day. That's work. It's like, no, it's not. That's a step. So I try to make sure that I'm always progressing, and that's balance for me. It's like I'm actually moving towards the things I want to accomplish. And if I'm not, and I take a step back, is it the way that I'm organizing myself? Is it the way that my plan is not working out? And always making sure that I check in and that I remain mindful of how I'm investing my time and energy and what the effect of my effort is. Am I spending too much time here? Or did I take on a goal that's way too big? How can I break that down further? So again, for me, it's always like planning as a way of regrouping as well. It's like, this isn't working. Why isn't it working? Let's create a difference and then try it in. Again, it's the agile approach. I like to learn things in my free time, so recently I started taking salsa lessons, for example. I don't even have a particular interest in salsa, but I just felt like that was so far outside my comfort zone that I'd start thinking about things differently. So when I do have some downtime or I'm in one place longer, I try to learn new things, and I try to, yeah, just expose myself to things that I'm not familiar or, more importantly, comfortable with. There's that. I like to read a lot. Yeah. I like to make things. I think I always just like to make things, even if I'm not working on the bullet journal. Like I want to make something else, or photography. Photography is a big one for me. I spend a lot of time taking pictures. I'd say Thailand was a big one. I would say that some of the smaller trips that I've taken, even closer to home, like, I spent some time with a friend upstate recently, and it was just a perfect trip. Like nothing had to be done and everything was enjoyed. Sometimes travel can become distracting in its own way because you're just like, I have to do this, and I have to do this, and see this, and see this. And sometimes that's great, but sometimes it's not. So I would say, usually when I go to Asia, it's so different from what I'm used to that it expands my awareness a little bit, and I really like that. I try to travel to places that allow me to either experience something for the first time or take me really out of my comfort zone. And sometimes that can happen really close to home, as I said. I experienced upstate again for the first time. It's not exotic, but I just lived there for a while, and that was really nice. Or you go to a place where everything is completely unfamiliar, and that's wonderful too. So it's the third leg of the book tour for the bullet journal method. I'll be stopping in China, Taiwan, and Japan, and essentially talking about my book and meeting my bullet journal family over there. It's really exciting. It's the first time that I've been able to travel over there for work, and especially to meet that community for the first time, so I'm really excited about that. What I will say in all fairness though is if I'm reaching the end of the bullet journal that I'm on currently, like I will stop a journal earlier to go on a trip, just because if I lose it, that's annoying, and that's happened before. And also I kind of like the idea that I start a new book with a journey. The ones that survive about, I unfortunately, one of the places I lived in was flooded, and I lost most of the things I owned. Yeah, that was the road to minimalism for me, forced minimalism. But I would say I think I have about 26 right now. A lot of people think that the bullet journal is a notebook, but the bullet journal actually is a methodology. I like to say that it is a mindfulness practice that's disguised as a productivity system. So on the one hand, it helps us organize what we have to do, and it does so using a paper notebook. And on the other hand, it helps us clarify why we're doing those things to begin with in the first place. So it gets you in the habit of checking in with yourself and making sure that you're investing your time and energy in the things that actually matter. I think that I'm still working on it to make sure it works for me. It's a big part of it. We change, and our needs change, and how we use tools and the tools we need to change as well. And I think that's what's allowed the bullet journal to remain relevant to me all these years. It looks very different now than it did even 2 years ago. It always adapts to what I need it to be. So I feel that it will continue to evolve as long as I continue to evolve. I don't know if I felt it was necessary, but over the years, I had learned so much from different online communities, especially in my space. So I was a graphic designer who focused in interactivity. There wasn't a web designer at the time, but over time, as I became a web designer, designed interfaces and learned how to code and program and design, I would look towards other people who were learning as well, because it was like the Wild West. Nobody had the right answers. Nobody knew what the right way to do things were, but people figured things out, and they shared that. And I was always tremendously grateful for all this knowledge and learning that they shared freely online. And when I had an opportunity to work on whatever I wanted to create something like that. And I'm not the best designer in the world, nor am I the best programmer in the world. So I asked myself, what do I do that's unique, that might provide value to other people? And when I started thinking about that, it occurred to me that even though I was a digital native and I worked in digital agencies, most people had a little black notebook with them, whether they were designers or project managers or developers. And I thought to myself, I use a notebook in a pretty unique way. Maybe if I explain to people how I organize my thoughts and my life, people can avoid or at least mitigate the same kind of challenges that I encountered in my own life. So I figured it was something that may be helpful to a few people. Early on, a lot of times I was force-fed different techniques and tools, like you need to take notes this way, or you need to pay attention this way. And I think the most common one that we hear is like, take as many notes as possible. So when you're sitting in class, you're basically trying to capture every word that's being said. And I don't know about you, but I can't do that. And if anything, that's really anxiety-inducing, and you don't hear what's being said anymore. You're just parroting the source as best as you can, and of course your notes won't be good and your handwriting will probably be bad. And so I started testing out different approaches to taking notes, and how I started organizing my information were more aligned with how my own mind worked. And the same thing was with keeping lists. Like, I liked keeping lists, but I realized that there was something missing from that. They missed context, and they would grow indefinitely long, and all of a sudden I had these tremendous to-do lists and I didn't know what to do with them. So I just started experimenting with things that were out there. And then as I started designing software as well, there were a lot of different methodologies for how to approach problem solving. So one big influence was Agile, essentially, where you're constantly iterating on ideas, which I essentially had been doing for years before, but it was really nice to be in a place where that was the work ethic. This is how you design. You fail fast and you continuously evolve. It's not about being perfect, it's about better. So I would say Agile was a very big one for me, which is interesting because most people know it from the digital space, but I take whatever works. None that necessarily come to mind. I mean, for me, a planner was either a calendar, which is something I didn't like because I wouldn't use it regularly. And then when I came back and there was like 4 days that had blank pages, I felt like I'd messed up or I'd done it wrong, and then I feel ashamed about it and I didn't want to use it anymore. So for me, I tried to steer away from anything that had a set, rigid template of any kind. And that's one of the reasons I use a dot grid in my own notebooks, because it's the flexibility of a blank page with the structure of a grid, and it always meets you where you are. So I would say in some ways I've tried out many things, and in some ways not very many things stuck. Like, obviously there are many different systems that use lists, and there are many different systems that organize information in a certain way, but none that I ever used were designed to change. Like, the whole idea is that you're constantly changing, so the way you approach, the way you use your notebook is always changing. I don't know how to answer that question, really. I know that it's helped some people profoundly, and I try to focus on doing whatever I can to allow it to help more people. Well, I've used notebooks all my life pretty much, and when I launched Bullet Journal in 2013 publicly, I was doing an interview and somebody had mentioned them. It's like, you should try them out. They have page numbers and all this stuff. And so when it was time to get a new notebook, I got one and I just never looked back. I just really liked it. The paper quality was perfect. They had a lot of details that lent itself to bullet journaling already. And I guess the non-romantic answer is I don't have to think about it. It puts up with my life, and I like to use tools that are completely invisible to me. I use it because it lasts and I don't have to worry about it. And all these things are luxuries, but to me they just are features, right? And once I started using it, I just considered notebooks less because I didn't need anything more. And then eventually when I launched my Kickstarter to actually fund the creation of a new website that was more community focused, I thought it would be a great idea to create a limited run, perfectly designed bullet journal notebook. And I know that I didn't want to go through the entire process of sourcing all the materials and everything, and notebooks have been done and they have been done well. Who would I want to partner with? And the choice was obvious. Like, I want to partner with the people whose products that I use, that I completely can vouch for, because I had already gone through a bunch by then and they put up with my nonsense. So I reached out to Leuchtturm and the rest is history. Yeah, I feel conflicted about it in this sense. A lot of people will say that the artistic bullet journal is not the right way to bullet journal. And I think that that's not correct either. Bullet journaling is about self-exploration and learning about yourself and understanding what motivates you and what actually keeps you going. And for some people, that is a very minimalist approach, and for some people, it's a very artistic approach. And for me, it's never been really about how you're bullet journaling, it's about why you're bullet journaling. So minimalist or artistic, it doesn't matter. Why are you doing it in the first place? And the only reason I feel conflicted about it is that, unfortunately, a lot of people who see these really artistic examples don't see what's underneath it. They don't understand why these people are doing this exactly. They think that it's about just creating art, which can be part of it. But the bullet journalists I know who've been doing it for a very long time eventually graduated into a more artistic style because they found that that's how they can connect with their life. It's a form of meditation. It's a way for them to express their creativity that they may not have in another way. And I think that's wonderful, and they should definitely continue to do that. What I do think is dangerous, though, is when somebody sees the bullet journal for the first time and believes that that's the only way it can be. And if they aren't creative or artistically gifted, then they feel that the bullet journal will not offer them any value. And I feel like that's a missed opportunity for them, unfortunately. If you ever see my videos, it's black and white and it's super minimal, and it's very focused on understanding what the best way is to invest my time and energy for me. And for a lot of other bullet journals, it's the same, but creating beautiful art can be that. That's how you want to invest your time and energy, because it fulfills you. So I think the short answer is I feel like artistic or minimal, both are fine as long as people understand why they're doing what they're doing, and also understand the foundation and the fundamentals of bullet journaling. If you choose to do it that way, that's great, but that's not how you have to do it. And getting to a point where you can make that choice is the most important thing to me. So I always say start with the basics, try it for 2 or 3 months so you understand how the pieces work together. And if you should choose to make it more elaborate, then by all means do it. But never feel that because someone else's bullet journal looks a certain way, yours needs to look that way. It needs to look the way that you need it to look. You don't need to be a minimalist, you don't need to be an artist, you need to be you. And the bullet journal needs to reflect who you are. I would say I have two. I need to have two. One is start with the basics. So go to bulletjournal.com and look at the free tutorials there just so you understand the foundation. But even before that, before you even set pen to paper, I think the most important part is understanding what you want to get out of it. So I think a lot of times people see a lot of solutions that they adopt before they really have defined their own problem. And it's like, oh, I could be tracking this, and I could be doing this better, and I could be doing this better. And yes, you could be, sure, but what do you need right now? Like, what is the most critical challenge or ambition that you're trying to pursue? And I think it's really important in life to find the tools to help you move forward towards the things that actually matter to you, as opposed to just buying the tools and building whatever, pops up in your Instagram feed. That's a fine way. You can be inspired, but like start with the question, how can it best serve me? And then start there. Because if you understand what your challenge is, if you understand what you need, then the bullet journal will have significantly more impact. If you adopt what other people are doing, then you are essentially working on other people's problems, other people's challenges, and over time, it won't be as impactful because you never set an intention for your bullet journal. So I would say that one of the most important things is set your intention for your practice. Yes, absolutely. Well, the first one is threading. Threading is a way of basically being able to cross-reference your different collections and different content inside your book. It's a little bit complicated to explain without being able to see it, but essentially what you're doing is, in the bullet journal, things don't have to be sequential. So you can start planning a vacation on pages 10 and 47 and 65, and essentially what you're doing is adding page numbers to know where inside your book they are, so you don't have to keep going back to your index. I thought threading was a fantastic piece of information. Then another one is the page complete bullet, which is something that I don't really talk about a lot, but when you have a very dense page of tasks and notes and events and everything, sometimes you have to like scan through the whole page to make sure that you've addressed everything, and if you've been bullet journaling a lot, that can be really dense. But the page complete bullet, essentially, you just have a dot next to your page number, and if you've done everything, you just mark it off. So when you're flipping through your pages, you just don't even have to scan all the information. You just see the X and you're done. So those are two. So when I first shared what I did online, it was more about the system. Here are very practical ways to help you organize your thoughts. And thoughts can be anything from to-dos to the way you feel to things you don't want to forget. A lot of people think that the bullet journal is just about keeping task lists, but for me it's about capturing thought. And that's just a first step for me. And I saw a lot of different questions come in from the community asking me, how do I deal with this challenge? How do I deal with this challenge? And at first those questions were really technical, like what happens with recurring tasks and things like that. And that's fine, I was happy to answer that, but over time what was really interesting is that people started seeing through the system a little bit and started identifying bigger, more deep questions, which is exactly why I use the bullet journal, but I was uncomfortable to share at first. Like, here's the system, here's the math, you can do that, but what is it answering specifically? How is it helping you? And people started noticing that they would feel less anxious, or they'd start understanding things about themselves they hadn't before. And I realized that the best way that I could serve the community wasn't just sending out these individual emails to people, like what is meaningful, what actually should be done, how should I best invest my time and energy, what is meaningful, what isn't. And these are questions that I find fascinating and have occupied me for a long time. And I found answers that I've found to be really helpful to me. So the book is about basically revealing what is under the surface of the bullet journal. Like, the system is very much just the iceberg, but what's beneath it I find to be much more important. Because on the one hand, I think we live in an age now where we nearly worship productivity, right? Being busy means that you are significant in some way. But in my own experience, I've realized that I've been incredibly productively working towards something for days, months, even years in one case, where I finally get to a point where I reach my goal and it doesn't matter. I was very productive, I did everything I was supposed to, and I get to the end and it didn't matter. And the reason it didn't matter is because I realized that the goal was never my own. I had adopted that goal from my community and my peers. Like, if you do this, you will be happy. And that wasn't true for many reasons, but one of which is because I'd never asked myself, what do I actually want? Why do I want that? Is this the best way to get there? And these series of questions can help us invest our time and energy with much more accuracy and have much more impact. And that's really what the book explores. What are the questions that you should be asking yourself on an ongoing basis? Not what other people tell you to do, but what have you learned by studying your experience? So on the one hand, you have a way to capture your experience through bullet journaling, but then the book explores different methods by which you can reflect on that experience and understand what do you want more of, what do you want less of, what has worked, what hasn't. And once you have that insight, you can put it right back into your life. And that's really what the bullet journal method is about. On the one hand, you have productivity. On the other hand, you have mindfulness. Right? And productivity helps you figure out what you have to do. And then mindfulness gives you an insight that helps you clarify why you have to do it. And the book talks about how you can use the bullet journal method to essentially align your actions with your beliefs and to lead a much more intentional life, which is the fundamental goal of the bullet journal method. The whole point of writing the first book was to try to create the best tool that I possibly could for the community and people that I feel struggled, like myself, to be more focused and productive. And I feel that if I can come up with a tool that serves in a similar way, then I would create that. I don't want to create a book just to create a book. I want to create something that adds value and can create impact. And until I believe that to be true for another project, I can wait. I think what should be taught to children at a younger age is that they're responsible for their own life in a way that's not based on like their homework or cleaning up their room, but the fact that they actually have the agency to solve their own problems, which is something that didn't occur to me until I was forced to do it. Like I was diagnosed with ADD at a very young age. And school for me was a consistent struggle because I was told how to do things a certain way and they didn't work the way that my mind worked, and it just made me feel even worse about myself until one day I started testing things out and they started working. For example, I started noticing early on that when I would draw in class, I could actually pay attention much better. But the thing is, when a teacher would see me drawing in class, they'd be like, pay attention. So I'd have to pretend to take notes, and then I wouldn't understand. As soon as they'd turn around, I'd start drawing again. Until one teacher realized, they're like, oh, every time you're drawing, you're paying attention. And every time you're taking notes, you're not. Every time you're looking at me, you're not paying attention. And she said, good for you for figuring that out. And it occurred to me, it's like, yes, I had figured that out, and it was okay. So I think what's important is that children are given some kind of framework that makes them enjoy solving their own problems or challenges and know that they are able to do that, sometimes even better than their peers or their adults. Because kids are always looking to the tall folks for answers. And a lot of times they won't be found there. So I feel like any kind of system that allows them to do that is helpful. For me, it was what eventually became bullet journaling. It's like, this works, this doesn't, this works, this doesn't. And understanding that if I don't put in that work, nobody will. I use one at a time. I used to use many different kinds of notebooks, so one notebook for school or per class even. And I also used to take a lot of pictures. I was really into photography, and I would take those photographs and actually create these really elaborate scrapbooks essentially. So I'd have my school books and like my personal journals and scrapbooks and all these things. And I traveled around so much, especially in college, I just couldn't deal with the weight. And I also started having problems remembering where I had written down what. Like if I'm in math class, I write down an idea for English, and in English and math class, and when I'm scrapbooking, that seemed like an ongoing problem that I just didn't want to deal with anymore. So I started figuring out ways to put everything into one book. And the one thing that kept holding me back was scrapbooking, because putting everything into one notebook didn't work. But as soon as digital photography took over, that kind of just took care of itself. So that's why I always encourage people to start with one notebook, so you never have to guess. I know this is terrible to say, but I try to use the tools that make me not think about the tools so much. So, for example, I use a Leuchtturm because I don't have to think about it. I trust it. And I would say in terms of pens, I usually just use the one that's there, but I like to use fine liner, fine tip pens a lot, because it slows my hand down, which makes my handwriting more legible. So I don't particularly like writing with it, but it's more practical and functional. I think anything that slows you down makes me choose my words more carefully, And again, I can understand and decipher my own handwriting better later, which is important. If I come across a sticker or my travelers or something, I will put it in. It's like the vestige from my scrapbooking days. So if I'm traveling somewhere and I'm at a cool like hotel or at an event, I'll just pop it in the page. Yeah, my pages don't have to be absolutely clear or perfect. I like them having some character. Yes, Google Calendar, without fail. I use that with my bullet journal all the time, which surprises some people, but for me, it's always about finding the right tool for the job. And I would be a hypocrite to say that technology is evil and we shouldn't be using it. It's like, absolutely, but we should be always using it to serve us. And Google Calendar is a fantastic tool, especially when you have to coordinate with a lot of people. I mean, I don't want to cop out, but I use both. I would say I use them both depending on how effective they are. Business. Book. Neither. Sparkling water. Nature. Bangkok. Indian. Fall. I like films a lot, so that's a tough question. Probably something by Fellini. I've been listening to Bonobo a lot recently.
Try. Could you move it just up a tiny bit because your the top of the hair is no.
Yeah, that's better. Once it records, it starts zooming in.
Yeah,
Just like
no,
1 second.
It's fine. It looks great still, but this is better. Thank you, Ryder.
Sure. Hi, this is Ryder Carroll, creator of the Bullet Journal, and unfortunately this year I won't be able to make it, but together with Leuchtturm 1917, we've organized a big surprise for the attendees of PlannerCon Europe in Brussels this year.